Welcome to Combat Faith with Alan Clark.
A few decades in the past, two of the most popular movie stars were Paul Newman and Robert Redford, who teamed in a movie in 1969 titled Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They were being chased relentlessly by a posse. Robert Redford had a memorable line, at least to me: "Who are those guys?" As an introduction to this Combat Faith channel on YouTube, as its presenter, I wanted to introduce myself, Alan Clark. Perhaps it occurred to my viewers, who is this guy? 2 months after my birth in June 1942, my father was commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Army, which he and my mother served for 20 years until 1962. By this year, I had completed my third year as a cadet at West Point, from which I graduated in 1963. As an Army brat, whose description I proudly accept, we lived in San Antonio and Dallas, Texas, Little Rock, Arkansas, Mission, Texas, and the lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas, obviously, while my father went to Japan to serve in the Army of Occupation in 1948. It was 8 months later that we were able to join him. Then there, Sendai and Fukushima, Japan, two locations hit so hard in the 2011 tsunami, Tokyo, Japan, to finish our tour. San Antonio again, while my father served a second tour in Asia for 16 months at the tail end of the Korean War, finishing up in Alexandria, Virginia. My father was a counterintelligence corps officer and was in intelligence staff positions for most of his career. While I was at West Point for my 3 years, I lucked out when my father was stationed at the headquarters of U.S. Army Pacific on Palm Circle at Fort Shafter, Hawaii. My visits on my leaves to Hawaii always found me visiting my parents at a new home. The first time, Triple Army Hospital, then Eva Beach on the west side of Pearl Harbor, Schofield Barracks, the historic Army base featured in the movie From Here to Eternity starring Burt Lancaster, and finally at Fort Shafter. In Hawaii, those years brought me immense pleasure and ties to the United States Army in the Pacific. Just after my 8th birthday, the Korean War broke out on June 25, 1950. The 7th Infantry Division was stationed at Camp Schimmelpfennig near Sendai, and I often had watched them parading through the streets of Sendai. I accompanied my parents to see off the troop trains departing Sendai to transport our troops to fight in the Korean War. We had finished our time in Japan, residing at Grand Heights outside Tokyo. It had been a Japanese air base. At age 8, I became an avid Army patch collector. One day I asked my father about a patch which I did not recognize. It was the patch of the United States Military Academy at West Point, and my father informed me it was a school to train men to become officers in the Army. He pointed out some West Pointers on a Sendai post, and soon I developed tunnel vision to focus on a mission to West Point, even as early as that young age of 8. I always appreciated seeking a goal early in life because it provided me a vision for my future that could be fulfilled. We lived in Alexandria, Virginia through my 10th grade, and beginning in 8th grade, my teacher suggested to my father that I should seek admission to a private school to ensure adequate preparation for the academy. I attended Gonzaga High School, several blocks directly north of the Capitol building, for 9th and 10th grade. It was a Catholic all-boys school. In 10th grade, my father was possibly going to be assigned somewhere else, an isolated post called Fort Churchill in Canada, and my Gonzaga headmaster spoke to my father and suggested that I seek admission to a boarding school. I obtained admission to Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire for 11th grade. Through an amazing set of circumstances, I received my principal nomination and eventual appointment and admission to West Point after 11th grade. I've always had fun telling my friends I'm a high school dropout who was able to graduate from college. In the summer of 1963, I met my first wife and was married at the end of that year. My first assignment was to the 17th Engineer Battalion of the 2nd Armored Division at Fort Hood, Texas. During my responsibilities as a junior aide to the commanding general of the division, the Vietnam War began to heat up. My wife had lost an early enthusiasm to be an Army wife and informed me that it was her desire for our mutual happiness that I resign my commission. This was heartbreaking to me, but I chose my marriage over my long-sought-after career as a regular Army officer. I was transferred to Army Intelligence and Security Branch and submitted my resignation from active duty. An assistant commander of my division asked me to accompany him to a tour in Korea as his aide. I foresaw that accepting that opportunity, with a return to a year or so as a final stateside assignment before resignation, would mean that I could avoid service in Vietnam, which of course would have pleased my first wife. My personal pride and the motto of West Point, duty, honor, country, ingrained in me, brought me to a decided and strong belief that I must serve in Vietnam, or I would never be able to attend future reunions of my class with pride if I were to miss the ongoing war. Therefore, I volunteered for a tour in Vietnam. The acceptance was immediate, of course, and off I went to Vietnam on August 1st, 1966. A short tour at a military intelligence unit in Nha Trang, which is on the coast of South Vietnam, halfway up to North Vietnam, began my service in the war. Soon after my arrival, I transferred to Special Forces, and the following 9 months fulfilled for me what became a most satisfying professional tour of duty. I was assigned to a clandestine unit, a classified unit, Detachment B57, 5th Special Forces Group. Our mission was clandestine collection of intelligence in Cambodia, the neutral country west of South Vietnam. In this assignment, with an assumed name, I debriefed a supposed defector, Cambodian officer, lived with and trained for infiltration missions in Cambodia via helicopters, several young Cambodian anti-communists, and eventually was transferred to Dak To Special Forces camp in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, just east of the tri-border area where Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam touch. In this camp on June 17, 1967, my life changed forever, 6 weeks before my one-year tour would have ended. My life came under an intense mortar and rocket attack by a North Vietnamese regular army battalion that had entered my area from their privileged sanctuary in Cambodia. I was the American awake and on alert shift in the camp at 4:30 a.m. and was engaged in having our mortars manned to fire counter-battery fire on the enemy position and place flares over our camp in the event of a ground attack by the enemy. I was to have been on the airstrip at 9 a.m. to depart the camp. Since I was undercover using a false name, my commanding officer was flying up from Saigon that morning to take me back to our headquarters, but it was not to be because I received wounds from mortar shrapnel and both my legs were amputated below my knees. For several years thereafter, my rehabilitation not only was for 15 months at an Army hospital to learn to walk on artificial legs, but the ongoing challenge of overcoming the overwhelming issues of what has been termed post-traumatic stress. My condition became a disorder when I was overwhelmed emotionally, and it was necessary in early 1968 for me to reside in a closed psychiatric ward at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio for 14 weeks. Then followed several years of psychiatric care with heavy prescription of anti-depressants until the mid-1970s when, due to my faith maturation as a Christian, I was able to cease psychiatric care and its accompanying drugs ever since. Subsequent opportunities to serve my state, country, and fellow veterans followed when I served as a senior member of Texas Governor Bill Clements' staff in Austin, as an Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs and Program Coordination and Director, National Cemetery System at the National Veterans Affairs Department in Washington during the President George H.W. Bush administration, followed by 9 years as an employee at the Dallas VA Medical Center. My first marriage ended in 1994. I was remarried in 2004 to Linda Frost, a widow of another West Pointer, Jack Frost, class of 1955. At the time I retired in 2005, I had been privileged to have contact with many veterans of our country who had been subject to the physical, soulful, and spiritual challenges of their wartime experiences. I have mentored many of them. After my retirement, it was my honor to be invited by military chaplains at many Army bases to be a guest at their warrior transition battalions to speak about my personal story of recovery from what I prefer to call our experiences from combat operating stressors. I've also spoken at Air Force, Navy, and Marine bases. My overall personal story of healing for us as military members, active and veteran, with first-hand anecdotes from all our wars, is related on my lay ministry website, combatfaith.com. My own experiences were published by Zenith Press in 2007 in an autobiography titled Wounded Soldier, Healing Warrior. With my connections over the years, I accumulated many veteran friends and wrote a second book published by Casemate Publishers in 2012, which included personalized stories from Vietnam with all branches of our military to include an Army nurse. It is titled Valor in Vietnam. My lifelong interest in history, coupled with my own wartime experiences and firsthand knowledge of the horrendous consequences so many of us war veterans face, led me to an historical analysis of the real causes of our wars from a socio-political, economic approach, not just waving the flag and patriotism. The results of 4 years of intense study, research, and writing produced my latest book, titled Soldier's Blood and Bloodied Money. I mention the different segments of our societies who get us into wars for personal power and financial profit. My latest endeavor to assist my fellow veterans, members of our nation who have served in the military, especially in war zones, is a YouTube channel my daughter Elizabeth has established. Several of my past presentations and interviews are posted on the playlist of the channel. It is my intention in the future to post on the channel anecdotal commentary from the multitudes of opportunities I've had to mentor veterans, relate my personal healing story, and the approach I've utilized to assist veterans and active military in their walk of healing. I have recognized that much of our turmoil from our wars is related to moral injury, as well as physical and soulful issues. Over the past few years, I have written a blog, www.combatfaith.blogspot.com, and it is my intention to add to the channel some of my patriotic and spiritual subjects about which I have written. I would appreciate any viewer to the channel to click on the subscribe button. I want to thank you very much for taking your time to join me as I introduce my channel.
Thank you for tuning in to Combat Faith with Alan Clark.